Once upon a time, on the day the $850 million concrete mixer ground to a halt, every engineer said the same thing. This machine is beyond repair. That's why the millionaire owner called all 40 workers together just to laugh at the cleaning lady who dared say she knew what the problem was. But when the young mechanic approached the monstrous German machine, she touched the drum and started reciting the model, the year, and even the serial number from memory. The silence that fell over the construction site gave everyone chills. What she was about to reveal about that failure would make a powerful man kneel before a young woman in a stained jumpsuit. Beatrice Monroe Sanders was just 34 years old when this happened, a widow who had lost her husband in a tragic car accident 2 years earlier. But in her eyes, you could see battles that would take others a lifetime to face. Every morning at 5 a.m., in the small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her father in the south side of Chicago, the place always smelled of fresh coffee, that peculiar aroma left by years of struggle and sacrifice. Mr. Ernest, her dad, was already up before her because the back pain never let him sleep more than 4 hours straight. "Good morning, Dad," Beatrice would whisper every day, kissing his wrinkled forehead. That 62-year-old man had dedicated 35 of those years to building skyscrapers with his own hands. "Morning, my girl," Mr. Ernest would reply in that raspy voice left from years of breathing construction dust. "Be careful out there on the site." Beatrice nodded, packed her worn lunchbox and put on her navy blue jumpsuit, the one with oil stains no detergent could remove, because she worked as an operator's assistant on the construction of the new Pacific Tower Business Center, a massive project worth $180 million that promised to be the most modern building in Chicago's financial district. But here's what makes this story so special. Beatrice wasn't just any operator's assistant. No, my friends, this young widow held a secret no one on that project knew. For 3 whole years, she'd worked on the assembly line at the German Liebherr factory in Detroit, one of the most important industrial plants in all of the Midwest. There, among perfectionist Germans and machines the size of houses, Beatrice learned to assemble industrial concrete mixers. Those gigantic beasts that cost millions and are the heart of any big build. And how did she get there? When her father suffered that terrible fall on a job site, fracturing 3 vertebrae and leaving him barely able to work, Beatrice was just 30, in her 2nd year of engineering school. She had to drop everything, her dreams, her books, her plans. She landed that job at Liebherr through an apprenticeship program. At first, the German foreman eyed her with suspicion, but she proved her hands could do what many men couldn't. She mastered every bolt, every valve, every hydraulic system in those colossal machines. But life can be cruel sometimes, right? The Detroit factory shut down operations a year ago, and Beatrice had to move back to Chicago, where she found the only job available, operator's assistant. A fancy title for cleaning machines and hauling tools. She made a measly $2,200 a month, peanuts considering her experience, but she didn't complain. She never complained because she had to pay the rent on the apartment, her dad's meds, the groceries, the electric and water bills. No one on the site knew about her past. To them, Beatrice was just the quiet woman in the stained jumpsuit, her hands always black with grease. Many mistook her for the janitor, some didn't even speak to her, and she endured it all with a dignity that breaks my heart every time I think about it. Now let me tell you about the other character in our story, Maxwell Duarte Campbell, 47 years old, owner of Duarte Associates Construction, a 6'1" man always impeccably dressed in Italian suits worth $15,000, genuine leather shoes, and a Rolex that cost more than the annual salary of 10 workers combined. Maxwell was what you'd call a successful man, 3 buildings a year, million-dollar contracts, an office on the 20th floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. But behind those gray eyes and square jaw, He hid an immense emptiness, a fear that gnawed at him day and night. Exactly 10 years ago, Maxwell had lost almost everything. A project delayed by 6 months due to imported machinery issues. 6 months that cost astronomical fines and the loss of 3 major clients, nearly bankrupting his company. Since then, Maxwell became obsessive. Obsessed with deadlines, efficiency, numbers. He'd stopped seeing people as humans and started seeing them as tools, as cogs in a machine that had to run perfectly or get replaced. "Time is money," he'd say, tapping his watch with his index finger, "and I lose neither." His wife had left him 5 years ago, tired of being second priority after his projects. His 2 grown kids barely called at Christmas. Maxwell had chosen success over love, contracts over family, and now lived alone in a 5,000-square-foot penthouse that was always empty and silent. The Pacific Tower was his most ambitious project, 32 floors of luxury offices, cutting-edge tech, prime location. Finish on time, and he'd get a $20 million bonus plus contracts locked in for the next 5 years. But even a week's delay, and the fines would pile up, $12 million a day, straight out of his pocket. So when the Liebherr HTM 1005 industrial concrete mixer broke down, Maxwell felt his worst nightmare return. That gigantic machine, painted bright yellow and metallic grey, was essential to everything. Without it, no concrete mix for the foundations. And without foundations, no building, simple as that. The mixer had cost $850 million. A marvel of German engineering, 33 feet long, 16 feet tall, a mixing drum with 13 cubic yards capacity. But for the last 8 days, the machine sat dead, and every day was money down the drain. Maxwell had hired 3 mechanical engineers, the best money could buy in Chicago. Julian Parker, the lead engineer, had a master's from Germany and charged $8 million for the consult. The other 2, Carlos Mendoza and Robert Swanson, had impressive degrees and resumes full of international projects, but none could pinpoint the issue. "It's the hydraulic system," Julian said, scratching his head. "No, it's electrical," Carlos countered. "I think it's a fault in the electronic controller," Robert opined. Maxwell watched with a mix of desperation and contained fury. He'd already spent $40 million on consults, useless spare parts and overtime, and the machine still wouldn't run. It was the 8th day of the shutdown when Beatrice was doing her cleaning routine around the mixer, wiping the hydraulic drum with a rag. Something caught her eye. She tilted her head, squinting, and brought her face inches from the metal. There was something odd on the primary cylinder's surface, a nearly imperceptible deformation, a tiny irregularity anyone else would ignore. But Beatrice wasn't anyone. Her heart raced. She recognized that flaw. She'd seen it before in Detroit at the factory. It meant something very specific, an internal crack in the valve system. She had to say something. She had to warn them. Beatrice took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her stained jumpsuit, and walked decisively toward where the 3 engineers huddled around a table covered in blueprints and tech manuals. Julian Parker, the lead, was gesturing emphatically, explaining his latest theory on the failure. "Engineer Parker, excuse the interruption," Beatrice said in a low but firm voice. Julian didn't even turn to look at her. He kept talking to his colleagues as if she didn't exist. Beatrice waited a few seconds, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but from the frustration of being invisible. "Engineer, this is important. I think I've identified the problem with the mixer." This time Julian whirled around, but the expression on his face wasn't interest. It was pure irritation. His eyes scanned Beatrice from head to toe, lingering on her grease-stained hands, her worn jumpsuit, her hair tied in a messy ponytail. "Excuse me," he said in a tone laced with condescension. "You identified the problem?" Yes, sir. There's a deformation on the main hydraulic cylinder, indicating an internal crack in the valve system, Beatrice explained calmly. Julian let out a dry laugh with no humor. His two colleagues mimicked him, exchanging knowing glances. Carlos Mendoza shook his head, smirking smugly. "Look, Missy," Julian said, stepping closer with arms crossed. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is high-complexity mechanical engineering, not window cleaning or floor sweeping. You do your job, we'll do ours. Got it?" Beatrice felt something snap in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, but it hurt all the same. Every time she thought of her dad, the nights he'd taught her about hydraulics when she was just 12, she thought of her 3 years in Detroit, the German engineers who respected her for her knowledge, not her titles. "I'm an engineer, and I worked at the Liebherr factory in Detroit. I'm familiar with this exact model. It's an HTM 1005, and it has a known manufacturing defect in batches from 2019 with serial numbers between—" "Enough," Julian interrupted, raising an authoritative hand. "I don't know what you smoked on break, but get back to reality. You didn't work at any Liebherr, and even if you did, which I highly doubt, you were probably in the cafeteria serving coffee to the real engineers. Now please, stop wasting our time and get back to your cleaning duties. Us adults are working here." The other two engineers laughed openly. Robert Swanson added in a mocking tone, "Watch too many Discovery Channel shows, huh? That doesn't make you an engineer, kid." Beatrice clenched her fists. Tears threatened to fall, but she wouldn't let them. Not ever. She was about to walk away when a voice made her freeze. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. Maxwell Duarte Campbell strode toward them with firm steps, his $15,000 gray suit impeccable despite the sight dust. His gray eyes scanned the scene, the three engineers laughing, Beatrice standing with grease-stained hands. "Julian?" Maxwell asked in a dry tone. "Nothing, Mr. Duarte," Julian replied quickly, adopting a professional tone. "Just one of the assistants who thinks she knows more about the machines than we do." Maxwell looked at Beatrice. He really looked at her for the first time in the 4 months she'd worked on the site. What he saw was what he expected. A young woman, petite and slim, in dirty clothes, humble appearance. Nothing impressive, nothing suggesting she knew anything useful. But something in Beatrice's expression intrigued him. There was no submission in her eyes. There was determination, and that in some twisted way bothered him deeply. "So, you know what's wrong with my $850 million mixer?" Maxwell asked. There was a dangerous edge to his voice. "I think so, sir," Beatrice replied, lifting her chin. And then, my friends, Maxwell Duarte did something that would change everything forever. He pulled out his phone and called Rodrigo, the site foreman. "Gather every worker in front of the mixer, all of them. Right now, we've got a show to watch." Beatrice felt the ground shift under her feet. No, he wouldn't do this. He couldn't be doing this to her, but he was. In under 10 minutes, the 40 construction workers were assembled in a semicircle around the giant mixer. Electricians, masons, welders, crane operators, general assistants, all murmuring, confused, not understanding what was happening. Maxwell climbed onto a high platform so everyone could see him. "Gentlemen," he announced in an imposing voice, "we have one here. What's your name?" "Beatrice Monroe Sanders," she replied, her voice shaky. "Beatrice," Maxwell repeated theatrically. "Beatrice, who usually cleans the machines, has decided she knows more than 3 engineers with international master's degrees. She thinks she can fix the issue that's halted this project for 8 days, costing me $96 million in fines, if anyone's keeping count." Some workers laughed nervously, others looked at Beatrice with pity. She kept her head high, but inside her heart pounded so hard she felt everyone could hear it. Maxwell continued, stepping down from the platform and approaching Beatrice slowly, like a predator. "Let's give her a chance to demonstrate her expertise." Beatrice, explain to us technically what's wrong with the mixer, and please use terms we simple mortals with college degrees can understand." The laughter was louder now. Julian Parker smirked, arms crossed. Carlos and Robert exchanged amused glances, enjoying the show. Maxwell got close to Beatrice, so close she could smell his expensive cologne, that scent of money and power oozing from every pore. "Or did you work somewhere special that made you so wise?" he asked with venomous sarcasm. "Let me guess. You bagged screws at a hardware store, and now think you're an engineer." "I worked on the assembly line at Liebherr in Detroit," Beatrice said, and her voice didn't shake this time. Maxwell let out a laugh that echoed across the site. A cruel, merciless laugh that made Beatrice feel the size of an ant. "Hear that?" Maxwell exclaimed, turning to the workers. "She worked at Liebherr." "I visited that factory. I toured those facilities, and the women I saw there were in HR or the cafeteria, not on the assembly line putting together million-dollar machines. So please, don't insult our intelligence." Beatrice felt tears burning her eyes but wouldn't let them fall. Not there, not in front of everyone. Images flashed in her mind. Her dad, Mr. Ernest, teaching her about hydraulic pressure using plastic bottles and water when she was 10. Mr. Ernest taking her to job sites on weekends so she could see real machines in action. Mr. Ernest telling her, "My little girl, knowledge isn't in papers, it's in the hands and the heart." In that moment, Beatrice made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Duarte," she said in a clear voice stronger than she felt, "if you'll allow me, I can explain the exact technical specs of this machine, with everything you need to hear." Maxwell looked at her with a mix of surprise and amusement. This little woman had guts, you had to admit that. It was like watching a mouse face a lion, pathetic yet admirable in its foolishness. "Go ahead," Maxwell said, gesturing grandly toward the mixer. "Enlighten us, Beatrice from Liebherr." And everyone waited. 40 pairs of eyes fixed on that 34-year-old widow in the jumpsuit and calloused hands, about to do something no one expected, something that would change everything forever. Beatrice walked slowly toward the mixer. Each step echoed in the expectant silence of the site. 40 men watched her, some with pity, others with curiosity, most expecting to see her fail. Maxwell Duarte stood with arms crossed, a mocking smile on his lips. Julian Parker already savored the moment she'd be silenced, exposed in her ignorance. But then Beatrice began to speak. "This is a Liebherr HTM 1005 concrete mixer," she said firmly, touching the side of the machine. "Model manufactured specifically at the Detroit plant between March and August 2019. The serial number on this unit is 18507, placing it right in the problematic batch identified internally by Liebherr's Quality Control Department in October of that same year." Julian Parker blinked. That was specific. Too specific. He glanced at his colleagues uncertainly. "The problem isn't in the electric motor, as Engineer Mendoza suggested," Beatrice continued, pointing to different parts as she spoke. "The motor is a Siemens 1LA7 at 160 kilobar, and it's functioning perfectly. It's not in the electronic controller, as Engineer Swanson suggested. The PLC is a Siemens S7-200, which I helped install in dozens of these units, and I know it's extremely reliable." Robert Swanson stopped smiling. His face now looked confused. "The issue is in the variable pressure hydraulic system," Beatrice explained, and now her voice held a confidence that commanded everyone's attention. "This mixer uses a 4-circuit independent hydraulic system made by Bosch Rexroth. The nominal working pressure is 420 bar, which is extremely high compared to conventional systems that run at 280 bar. This high pressure is needed because the mixing drum has an internal diameter of 9.2 feet and needs to generate 85 kN of mixing force for high-strength concrete." Maxwell Duarte let his arms drop. His smile vanished. He was listening, really listening. The hydraulic system has 6 proportional valves. Liebe didn't notify clients about the recall externally because technically the machine still operated within acceptable parameters. But internally, at the factory, we knew these units had a short lifespan and would eventually fail. Are you following me, friends? Because I know it's technical, but you need to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The young widow wasn't making anything up. Every word, every number, every spec was exact, precise. The crack I visually identified on the primary hydraulic cylinder, Beatrice continued, kneeling beside the machine and pointing to a specific spot, is an external manifestation of a much more serious internal problem. The proportional valve number 3, located in the central hydraulic block, has a micro fissure in its body. This fissure occurred during the heat treatment process of the material at the German foundry that supplied these components to Liebe. Julian Parker stepped closer, unable to help himself. He pulled out his phone and started searching for technical info. Carlos Mendoza stood with his mouth agape. The improper heat treatment left residual stresses in the metal, Beatrice explained, now fully immersed in her technical breakdown. When the valve is subjected to repeated 420 bar pressure cycles, the fissure propagates microscopically. The crack in this unit should be about 0.3 mm long by 0.05 mm wide. It's invisible to the naked eye, but causes an 18% pressure loss in hydraulic circuit number 2, which controls the mixing drum's rotation speed. My God, someone whispered from the crowd. This pressure loss triggers the control system to detect an anomaly and activate the automatic safety protocol, Beatrice went on, standing up. That's why the machine starts but shuts down after 40 seconds. It's not an electrical fault or a bad sensor. It's a protection system preventing the mixer from running with insufficient hydraulic pressure, which could cause uneven concrete distribution and compromise mix quality. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind could be heard. 40 people held their breath. To confirm the diagnosis, Beatrice said, walking to her backpack and pulling out a small worn notebook. We need to run a pressure test at the measurement point for circuit 2. If my diagnosis is correct, the reading will be 344 bar instead of the nominal 420. That's exactly an 18% drop, matching the failure pattern we documented in Detroit with other units from the same batch. Maxwell Duarte felt something break inside him. It wasn't just surprise, it was absolute shock, the feeling of having judged someone so terribly wrong that it physically hurt. Do that test now, Maxwell said to Julian, his voice hoarse. It took 15 minutes to hook up the precision manometer to the exact point Beatrice had indicated. Julian's hands shook as he adjusted the connections. When he finally started the mixer and took the reading, his face paled. 344 bar, he announced in a near whisper. Exactly 344 bar. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Maxwell brought his hands to his head. Carlos and Robert exchanged looks, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. But that's not all, Beatrice added, and now there was something different in her voice. She wasn't the scared young woman anymore. She was the professional who knew exactly what she was talking about. The damaged valve is in the 3rd level of the hydraulic block, meaning to access it, you need to fully disassemble the front distributor assembly, disconnect the 12 high-pressure hydraulic lines, remove the secondary control panel, and extract the entire block. That takes about 18 hours for disassembly if done right, following Liebe's safety protocol to avoid accidental residual pressure release. She pulled a yellowed plastic folder from her backpack. Inside were documents and photos of her at the Detroit factory, wearing a hard hat and orange vest next to 2 identical mixers. Certificates signed by German engineers. A recommendation letter in German and English. Diploma from Liebe's technical apprenticeship program. I worked on assembly line number 3, Beatrice said, her voice now choked with contained emotion. I personally assembled 47 HTM 1005 units. I participated in the failure analysis when we discovered the issue with the Bosch Rexroth valves. I helped disassemble 19 of these machines during the internal recall. I know every bolt, every seal, every connection on this mixer, because I built it with my own hands. Maxwell Duarte took the documents with trembling hands. It was all real. The photos were authentic. The certificates had official Liebherr stamps. The signatures from the German engineers were legible. Klaus Hoffmann, assembly line manager. Friedrich Weber, quality control supervisor. "Why?" Maxwell began, but his voice failed. "Why are you cleaning machines with this experience?" Beatrice looked him straight in the eyes, and in that gaze was pain, but also dignity. "Because the factory closed a year ago, Mr. Duarte. And when I got to Chicago with my resume, no one called me for interviews. I sent it to 17 construction companies and got no responses. I finally got this operator's assistant job because I needed to pay for my dad's meds. So I took it gratefully, because at least it was honest work." Tears finally welled in Beatrice's eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of vindication, of all the pain built up over months of invisibility, of being belittled, treated as useless. "I didn't ask to be humiliated in front of everyone," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted the machine to work, because that's what I know how to do. That's what I love to do." Maxwell Duarte dropped to his knees, literally dropped to his knees before her, before all the workers, opposite the engineers he'd paid millions. And for the first time in 10 years, since he'd lost everything and become this cruel version of himself, Maxwell Duarte wept openly. "Forgive me," he whispered. "My God, forgive me." My dear friends, what happened in the following minutes was something none of those present would ever forget. To see a powerful man crumble, to see a tyrant acknowledge his cruelty, it's something that touches the soul in a way words can barely describe. Maxwell Duarte stayed on his knees before Beatrice, hands covering his face. His shoulders shook. This man who'd built empires, commanded $100 million projects, feared and respected in equal measure, cried like a child in front of 40 workers who'd never seen him show even a hint of vulnerability. "Forgive me," he repeated between sobs. "Forgive me, Beatrice, forgive me." Beatrice didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to run, to escape all that attention, all those stares. Another part, the part she'd inherited from her dad, Mr. Ernest, that kindness neither poverty nor humiliation could destroy, made her stay, made her place a trembling hand on the man's shoulder. "Mr. Duarte," she whispered. Maxwell looked up. His grey eyes, always so hard and calculating, were now red and swollen. He looked 10 years older in minutes. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, voice choked. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you, what I've done to all of you." He stood slowly, legs shaking, and turned to face the 40 workers who'd stayed silent, processing what they'd just seen. "For 10 years, Maxwell began, his voice echoing with deep sorrow. "I've treated people like machines, like disposable tools. All because a decade ago I lost almost everything to a project delay. I became obsessed with time, with money, with efficiency, and in the process I lost something far more important: my humanity." He walked toward the workers, looking each in the eye. "You," he said, pointing to a mason named Rodrigo, whose hands were full of calluses. "Rodrigo, you've been asking for a day off for 3 months to go to your daughter's birthday party. I denied it because the project couldn't stop." "Miguel," he said, pointing to an electrician, "you asked for a salary advance because your wife needed surgery. I said that wasn't my problem." "Carmen," he turned to one of the few women on site who worked in admin, "you suggested I implement an extra safety program after Jose fell from the scaffolding. I called you paranoid and said accidents are part of the job." Tears rolled down his face again. "I've treated you like numbers on a spreadsheet, like operating expenses. And all this time, you're the ones who actually build my dreams, who make my projects real, who put your hands, your sweat, your health into every brick of these buildings that bear my name." Julian Parker stepped forward. He had tears in his eyes too. "Mr. Duarte," he began, but Maxwell raised a hand. "No, Julian, you deserve an apology too, and Carlos and Robert. I hired you because of your impressive degrees, because you studied at prestigious universities, but I taught you, by my example, to disdain practical knowledge, to belittle those without titles on the wall. I turned you into versions of myself, and that's unforgivable." Julian shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. I'm responsible for my own actions." He turned to Beatrice, face twisted in shame. "Beatrice, what I did to you was unforgivable. I treated you with contempt, with arrogance. I assumed because you're a woman, because you're young, because you don't have a college degree, you couldn't know anything. And it turns out you know far more about these machines than I do. Far more." Carlos Mendoza and Robert Swanson stepped up too. "I laughed at you," Carlos said, voice trembling. "I mocked your knowledge, and you gave us a lesson in humility I'll never forget." "We said horrible things," Robert added. "Comments about TV shows, about coffee, as if manual work has no value, as if only our degrees give us the right to respect." Beatrice looked at them all, overwhelmed by the avalanche of apologies. She didn't know what to say. For months, she'd been invisible to these people, and now they all saw her, really saw her. Maxwell approached her again, this time with an expression mixing pain and determination. "Beatrice, I need you to hear me. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, absolutely nothing, but I'm going to anyway." He took a deep breath. "Fix the mixer. Please do it, and I'll pay you exactly what I paid these 3 engineers to try and solve it, $40 million. The crowd gasped collectively. 40 million. That was nearly 2 years' salary for Beatrice. But Maxwell continued, raising a finger. "If you do it, it's not just about the money. It's about proving it to all of us, proving it to me, that true knowledge, the kind that comes from hands and heart, is worth more than all the degrees in the world." Beatrice felt tears stream down her cheeks. She thought of her dad, thought of the nights he'd come home with his back wrecked but smiling, saying, "Today we built something beautiful, my girl, with these hands." She thought of the German engineers at Liebherr, who treated her with respect, who taught her that talent matters regardless of age or gender. She thought of her late husband, who had always encouraged her passion for machines before his accident. Beatrice began, voice choked. "I'm not doing it for the money, Mr. Duarte. I do it because I love these machines. I do it because my dad taught me that a job well done is its own reward. I do it because when I see a broken machine, I can't just go home and forget. I need to fix it." Maxwell nodded, wiping tears with the back of his hand. "Then do it, but please let me learn from you. Let us learn from you," he said, looking at the 3 engineers. "Because clearly, with all our degrees, we don't know half of what you do." Beatrice looked at the massive mixer, her mixer, because in that moment, in some deep, inexplicable way, she felt that machine was hers. It was her chance, not just to prove herself, but to honor her dad, to honor all the manual workers belittled, ignored, treated as inferior. "I need 48 hours, she said in a firm voice, "and I need no one interrupting while I work. You can watch, you can learn, but no interfering." "You have whatever you need," Maxwell replied immediately. "Tools, equipment, assistance, whatever." "I don't need assistance," Beatrice said. "This machine and I have history. We need to sort this out together." And then, my dear friends, Beatrice did something beautiful. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Everyone heard as she said, Dad, yeah, it's me, Dad. Remember everything you taught me about hydraulic systems? Well, now I'm using every lesson. I'm gonna make you proud. She paused, listening. I love you too, Dad. Bye. When she hung up, there was a smile on her face, a smile of determination, of purpose, of someone finally getting the chance to show who she really is. Maxwell ordered chairs brought for him and the engineers. He sat in front of the mixer like a student before a master. And as Beatrice began meticulously disassembling each component of the hydraulic system, patiently explaining every step, Maxwell Duarte felt something he hadn't in 10 years. Genuine respect for another person, admiration, and something that felt dangerously like hope. The hope of becoming the man he was before fear and obsession consumed him. The other workers approached one by one, not to mock, not to doubt, but to learn, to witness something extraordinary. A master in her element, showing that true knowledge doesn't come with labels from prestigious universities, but from calloused hands and passionate hearts. For the first 12 hours, Beatrice disassembled the entire hydraulic system with surgical precision, every bolt removed in exact order, every hose disconnected, meticulously marking its position. Maxwell, Julian, Carlos, and Robert watched from their chairs, taking notes, asking respectful questions that Beatrice answered with infinite patience. See this valve? She explained, holding a metal component the size of her fist. It looks simple, but it has 19 internal parts. If you disassemble it without knowing the right sequence, you can damage the Teflon seals that hold the pressure, and those seals cost $2,000 each. At 3 a.m. On the first day, when most workers had gone home, Beatrice finally reached the central hydraulic block. There it was, exactly where she'd predicted, the proportional valve number 3. With steady but gentle hands, she extracted it from the assembly. Under a halogen lamp's light, using a jeweler's loupe she'd brought from home, Beatrice found what she sought. "Here it is," she whispered, and there was a touch of sadness in her voice. "See?" Maxwell leaned in with the loupe, and there, on the valve's aluminum body, was a line as thin as a hair. The crack, invisible to the naked eye but lethal to the machine's function. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said with a melancholic smile. "In its tragic way, it's beautiful. Because look how this tiny crack, this microscopic imperfection, stopped an $850 million machine. It reminds us that even giants have vulnerabilities." Julian looked at her in awe. "Why do you say it's beautiful?" "That's the problem." "Because it teaches humility," Beatrice replied. "This valve was made in Germany by engineers with decades of experience. It passed rigorous quality controls and still failed. It reminds us perfection doesn't exist, that we all make mistakes, we're all vulnerable, even the most sophisticated machines, even the most powerful people." She looked straight at Maxwell when she said that last part. He nodded slowly, understanding the message. Now the problem was critical. No spare valves available in the US. The nearest part was in Brazil. It'd take 3 weeks to arrive, 3 weeks Maxwell didn't have. But Beatrice had a plan. "My dad taught me something when I was a kid," she said, holding the damaged valve. "He taught me that sometimes, when you can't replace, you have to repair, like a doctor with a patient." Over the next 20 hours, Beatrice performed what she called precision metal surgery. First, she meticulously cleaned the crack with diluted muriatic acid, then used a micrometric arc welder, normally for jewelry, to apply special nickel-silver alloy solder in microscopic layers, filling the fissure atom by atom. Each layer had to cool exactly 22 minutes before the next. "Why 22 minutes?" Carlos asked, fascinated. "Because if you cool too fast, you create new stresses in the metal," Beatrice explained without taking her eyes off her work. "Wait too long, and the previous layer oxidizes, so the next won't adhere right. 22 minutes is the sweet spot where the material hits exactly 140 degrees Celsius, the ideal temperature for molecular adhesion of nickel-silver alloy." Maxwell shook his head in admiration. How do you know this? My dad, Beatrice replied with a tired smile. He fixed construction tools when I was little, couldn't afford new ones, so he learned to repair what we had. He taught me poverty forces you to be creative, forces you to understand things on a level money never teaches. After repairing the valve, Beatrice added an external reinforcement using a 316L stainless steel plate, 2 mm thick, laser cut to precision and fitted around the repaired area like a protective corset. Then she manually recalibrated the entire hydraulic system, adjusting each of the other 5 valves to compensate for the tiny pressure variations the reinforcement would introduce. It was 11 p.m. on the second day when Beatrice finally reassembled everything. Her hands shook from exhaustion. She had deep, dark circles. Her jumpsuit was even more stained than before, but in her eyes shone something triumphant. "Ready!" she announced. Word spread like wildfire through the site. Even though it was nearly midnight, the 40 workers returned. They needed to be there. Maxwell was pale with nerves. The 3 engineers exchanged looks of hope and fear. Beatrice stood before the mixer's control panel, hand on the start button, and then did something unexpected. She closed her eyes and whispered something no one else heard. A prayer, not to any saint, just a silent talk with her dad, with the German engineers who'd trusted her, with her late husband who'd believed in her, with all the people who'd thought she could be more than what the world saw. She pressed the button. The Siemens electric motor roared to life, the hydraulic system pressurized with its characteristic hiss. The mixing drum began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, finding its perfect rhythm. The numbers on the control panel stabilized, 420 bar, perfect pressure, ideal speed, normal temperature. The mixer was running perfectly. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the 40 workers exploded in applause, cheers, celebration. Some cried, others hugged. Maxwell Duarte covered his face with his hands, sobbing openly. Julian, Carlos, and Robert applauded Beatrice with a mix of relief and awe. Beatrice just smiled, tears streaming down her grease-streaked cheeks. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, looking up at Chicago's night sky. Maxwell approached her and, without a word, hugged her, a genuine fatherly hug, full of gratitude and respect. When they parted, he pulled out his checkbook. $40 million, he said, writing the check with trembling hands. "As promised. But Beatrice, this isn't over. I want to offer you something else." Beatrice took the check, still processing the amount in her hands, and some she'd never imagined having. "Something else?" she asked, confused. "A job, not as an operator's assistant, but as heavy equipment technical supervisor for Duarte Associates. $8 million a month salary. You'll oversee maintenance on all our machines across the 3 sites we're working. And most importantly, you'll train our engineers on what it really means to understand these machines." 4 months passed, my dear friends. And like in every good story, let me tell you what happened next, because that's where the real magic lies. The Pacific Tower finished not just on time, but 2 weeks early. Beatrice personally supervised every piece of machinery on that site and 2 other unrelated Duarte projects. But more than that, she became something no one expected, a teacher. Maxwell kept his promise in a way that exceeded all expectations. He created the Duarte Technical School, a free program where workers without college degrees could learn specialized trades. In the first 4 months, 120 people graduated in fields like precision welding, industrial hydraulics, high-voltage electricity, and heavy machine maintenance. Beatrice taught classes twice a week, sharing everything she knew with a generosity that moved everyone. But here's the part that excites me most, friends. Remember Mr. Ernest, Beatrice's dad, that 62-year-old with the fractured spine, barely able to walk for years. Maxwell hired him as a specialized consultant for the technical school. Mr. Ernest, with 35 years of construction experience, his calloused hands and huge heart, became the program's most beloved teacher. Students called him the wise man because he had an answer for every problem, a solution for every challenge. And Maxwell changed in ways no one thought possible. He implemented paid time off for all workers, created an emergency medical fund for families. He started showing up to sites not in his luxury SUV, but in his old car. And he'd sit down to lunch with the masons, the electricians, with the people building his dreams. He learned about their families, became the kind of boss he wished he'd had when he was young. One afternoon, as Beatrice inspected an excavator on a North Side site, Maxwell approached her. "You know what's funniest?" he said, looking at the workers with a smile. "For 10 years, I chased success obsessively, treated people badly, ignored their needs, only cared about the numbers, and I was never truly successful. I was rich, sure, but empty. Now, treating everyone with respect, valuing each person's knowledge, building community, now I feel truly fulfilled, and my projects are better than ever." Beatrice smiled. "My dad always said a building is only as strong as the hands that build it. Mistreat those hands, and the building's weak. Honor them, and it's invincible." The story of the widowed mechanic who saved the Pacific Tower became a legend in the U.S. construction industry. Newspapers ran articles, TV shows did segments, but for Beatrice, the real reward wasn't fame. It was seeing her dad get up every morning with purpose, with dignity, teaching a new generation. It was knowing every person graduating from the Duarte Technical School got an opportunity the world had denied them. It was understanding she'd done more than fix a machine. She'd restored many people's faith that talent and hard work matter more than titles and money. And so, my dear friends, this story ends. A story that teaches us true knowledge doesn't come with labels from prestigious universities, but from calloused hands and passionate hearts. That respect isn't measured by what someone has, but by what they know and can do. That human dignity has no price, and every person, regardless of appearance or background, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. Because in the end, what we build with respect and love lasts forever. What we build with contempt and arrogance crumbles sooner or later. Thank you for listening, my friends. Thank you for being here. And always remember, never underestimate anyone, because sometimes the most extraordinary people come in the plainest packages. Yeah. If you enjoyed this story on Engines of Hope, hit that like button to show some love. It really helps spread these inspiring tales. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Whether it's Chicago, New York, or anywhere across the US or the world, your support means everything.